Hey everyone. As you can see, there's a lot of little moving parts for this assignment, and for all of them, there's going to be a place where you turn it in, and where you turn it in, I'll give you instructions to help you know what to turn in. But it helps a lot of times to just hear me explain those things, and also I want you to see how they kind of all work together, and that might help you understand them. So I want to go ahead and get you started on the project in a way that makes you understand what's due, when it's due, and why we're doing it, okay? So the first thing your group is going to do is use the discussion that I set up for you to introduce yourself to the group and set up your first meeting via video conference, okay? And you're going to have a meeting. It doesn't have to be a video conference. It can actually be like a 3 or 4 way phone call, but I want you not to just use text. I want you to use at least voice, if not voice and visual, to have a meeting. And then in that meeting, you're going to do 3 things, okay? One of them is due on Friday, but I'll actually give you till Saturday. It'll say the due date is Friday, but you'll have until Saturday to turn it in. The first thing is the topic. So your group has to meet to decide what you guys are going to ask as a question that the survey is going to help you answer. Okay, and you're going to submit the topic to me for approval. The due date is technically Friday so that I can approve it. If your group needs Saturday, because none of you can meet until Saturday, I'll give you that extension, but by the end of Saturday, I need your topic for approval. Okay. The second thing you're going to do in this meeting, besides picking a topic, is you're going to go ahead and write the group contract and the agenda for the next meeting. And writing a group contract, talking through your topic is going to take a little bit of time, but writing the group contract is going to be the most time-consuming thing. And then you're going to write an agenda for the next meeting. Okay. So the meeting where you pick the topic, write the group contract, and set the agenda for the second meeting, I don't need proof of that meeting. I just need it to happen so that you have all those answers. But I will need proof of your second meeting, which is when you guys will start working on the survey, okay? But let me go ahead and explain the group contract, and then I'll explain the agenda. So when you write the group contract, when we work in the professional world, we do not call them group contracts. They don't have a name. But this does happen in the workplace, where when you are put on a team, you have to decide what you guys are going to do, how you're going to do it, when you're going to meet, who's in charge, who's group leader, what software are you going to use, who's in charge of what, so on and so forth. We often talk that out and somebody takes notes. Somebody might email out everybody the answers to those things. Sometimes you work in a group, sometimes you work in a professional workplace that answers some of those questions for you. For example, we always use the same software, or your manager's on the team, so they're the obvious group leader, so on and so forth. But sometimes you really have to think this through. I've left questions for you, and your book explains this, but I want you to think through who is going to be in charge of this project in the sense of who's going to keep us all on track and be the liaison between your group and me. What software are you going to use for your video conferencing? You can use Google Hangouts, and Skype for free. You can also use Adobe and a few others. It doesn't matter to me as long as all of your group members agree and can access it. What software are you going to use for the actual survey? You can use one called Qualtrics at FIU that FIU gives you a subscription to, and you can also use Google Forms. Both of those programs will let you write a survey and share the link. There are lots of other programs, but be careful of some of them because they will have a limit on how many questions you can ask for free. For example, SurveyMonkey only lets you ask 10 questions last I checked, and you don't want to limit yourself in that way. Your group contract should also talk about how are you guys going to communicate. Are you going to have a WhatsApp chat? Are you always going to email? Are you always going to talk through Canvas? How are you guys going to communicate when you need to communicate with your group members? How often are you expected to communicate? When are things going to be due? When is your next meeting? And in this case, if you're looking ahead, you'll see that for most of the parts of the collaborative part of the project, only one person has to turn in the draft or the agenda or the meeting minutes or whatever for your group. Only one person for your group has to turn it in for the whole group. But maybe you use the group contract to lay out who's going to turn in what so that they know what they're responsible for. I would really like it if it was not always the same person turning in everything, because that's setting yourself up for failure where that person becomes overly responsible for everything. I'd like you to use the group contract to decide who's in charge of turning in what and distribute that work. The key to a good group contract is to think through what is going to cause problems in your group work and how can you try to minimize those problems. So for example, if you often have problems with people not communicating, what can you put in the group contract to make sure people communicate, and so on and so forth. There's sort of 3 types of personalities in group work, and they're all good to try to think about when you're writing the group contract. First, there's like sort of the flaky student, the student who doesn't pull their own weight, who doesn't do their work, and you want to try to make sure that it is written out in that contract what they're responsible for, so that you can actually say with confidence they didn't pull their own weight. Because if they don't know what they're responsible for, maybe they don't think they're not pulling their weight, right? So like, you need to make sure that they understand exactly what they're responsible for, so that it's obvious that to me and to your boss in the future that this person didn't do their job. There's the shy, quiet student. Sometimes there are students who seem on the outside like they're not doing their work, but really what's happening is they're kind of shy and unsure of themselves. And if you're overly confident and making all the decisions, they're going to kind of step back and be like, well, I guess I'll let him do it. But it's not because they don't want to do the work, it's because you're kind of not letting them. And there's the third kind of student, and this is the student who actually hates group the work the most, is a lot of times one person who thinks their group members are not very valuable as group members is often kind of bossy and controlling. And trust me, the other students don't like the bossy student more than the bossy student doesn't like the lazy student. You do not want to be micromanaged. You don't want somebody who's a know-it-all, who redoes your work without permission, and so on and so forth. Don't be that student. But also, what can you put in the group contract to make sure that the work is distributed evenly, that everybody understands what is happening, when it's happening, and to encourage the shy student to participate, to discourage the bossy student from taking over. So think about those things when you're writing the group contract. There's no format for the group contract. It can be a bulleted list, it can be a numbered list, it can be in paragraph form. That part doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that you really think through the questions that I left for you and any other questions you can think of. As a side note, before I go on to the meeting minutes and agendas, you are not expected to do anybody's work, and you're not expected to pretend group work is going well if it's not. If someone is not pulling their weight or is being bossy or whatever, you do have a responsibility to an ethical responsibility to reach out to them and tell them what's up. Sometimes people are having like catastrophically bad things happen in their lives, and you have an ethical responsibility as a human being to say like, hey, what's up? Because sometimes people have real reasons for not pulling their own weight. Number 2, you have an ethical responsibility to reach out to coworkers and colleagues before you go to your boss, or in this case, me. But reach out to them, say what's going on, or I don't like your attitude, or can we solve this issue? Reach out to them. If things do not improve, please, please, please reach out to me. In no situation should you do someone else's work and not tell anyone that you did their work. That's not ethical. I'm not asking you to do that. And I'm also not asking you to suffer in silence. If someone's not doing their work, I will pull them out of the group and make them work alone. And I will reach out to them and talk to them first. But if it's very clear that they can't do the work, I'll pull them out of the group and not have you split the work with them, because they're not helpful and they shouldn't get a good grade, right? Unless they do work on their own. So the group contract's meant to avoid a lot of that stuff happening. And then the group evaluation at the end of the project's where you get to tell me, what that person did. What every person in your group did as far as the project, how well they worked. And remember, a big part of this class is a professionalism grade. And then on top of that, part of this assignment is professionalism. You're expected to be a good group member. So you get to tell me at the end of the semester, at the end of the project, if they did well or not. But think of the group contract as like the beginning of the project. This is what I expect. And then the group evaluation of being, did they meet those expectations? So they kind of go hand in hand. They should sort of match each other. In other words, if you can see yourself later complaining about someone for doing something, well, that's something that should have been addressed in the group contract, right? So communication, doing their part, turning in things on time, all of that kind of stuff. But then you also want nitty-gritty stuff like when are things due, what programs are we going to use, so on and so forth. So that's the group contract. So in your first meeting, you're going to pick your topic and turn that in Friday or Saturday. you're going to write the group contract, and that's due anytime before Monday until midnight. So if you have it done earlier, you can turn it in earlier, but it's due Monday by midnight. And the third thing you're going to do is turn in your agenda for the second meeting. Now, the second meeting is where you're going to write the survey or questionnaire. And I mean that loosely, because some groups might decide to literally conference and write every single question together. Some groups might say, come to the meeting with certain questions. Every group's going to treat writing the survey differently. You're going to write an agenda, and one group member is going to post it. And the agenda says, essentially, here are our goals for that meeting. Think of the agenda as, this is a list of what we have to get accomplished, and the meeting is not over until we've accomplished these things. And also, we're not going to talk about other things. We're going to talk about these things. So an agenda is a way of keeping you on track, keeping you accountable, and making sure that you're really addressing the things you need to. You can Google around to see what an example of an agenda looks like, but usually it's just kind of like a bulleted or numbered list of like, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this, right? It literally just lists what your goals are for the meeting, and you're going to turn that in by Monday night as well, to tell me what your exact goals are for the meeting where you write or revise or draft your questions for your survey. Okay, so then you're going to turn in the agenda, and then you have to have the meeting. And again, if you turn that in on Saturday, you can have the meeting on Sunday, even though you don't have to prove that you had the meeting till later in the week. The due dates are sort of the last day you can do this by, but you can do it days earlier and turn it in days earlier. But you have to turn in an agenda for a meeting where you write the survey. Then you have to actually have the video conference. And then somebody has to take a screenshot, so I see all your lovely faces video conferencing, and turn that in. And then somebody has to write the meeting minutes. And in the directions for the meeting minutes, I will attach some examples, but meeting minutes and agendas kind of look the same, except meeting minutes are heavier. They have a lot more words in them. In a meeting minutes, you are basically going through what was discussed, like sort of who proposed what decisions were made in order. So think of it as like an agenda is like, we're going to talk about A, we're going to talk about B, we're going to talk about C. And then in the meeting minutes, you're like, okay, we talked about A, Diego said we should do this, John said we should do that, we decided on this. Then we talked about B. We talked about this for a little bit, then we talked about this for a little bit, this is what we decided about B. And so you can tell that there's like more to say in the meeting minutes. However, you are not going to write down every single word that people said in the meeting. You're just going over sort of what was discussed, what was decided. Think of it as a summary of the meeting. Sometimes at work, people who weren't there read the meeting minutes to find out what happened. Sometimes meeting minutes are legal documents, especially if you work for the government. And then also, sometimes you'll have a meeting like 3 months later, and the boss will say, like, I'm attaching the meeting minutes so you can remember what we talked about at the last meeting. And you can go through and say, like, oh yeah, we talked about this is what was decided, we talked about this, that was decided, right? So you're going to turn in an agenda, have the meeting where you work on writing the survey, take a screenshot of that meeting, and somebody has to turn in meeting minutes from that meeting. And then in the week or so after that, your job is going to be to finish writing the survey, edit and revise it, and turn in a draft for a peer review, fix it after the peer review. You can meet as many times as you want through that period, but I don't need proof of those meetings. You can not meet, you can talk through WhatsApp or whatever your group decides. And then after you've distributed your survey and gotten response, you do have to have another meeting. And again, you have to do the same thing. You have to turn in an agenda telling me what that meeting is going to be about and what the goals are for that meeting. You have to take a screenshot to prove you had that meeting, and you have to have meeting minutes. Now that meeting, I expect you to discuss the results of the survey, and your group needs to work through what it means. So if you had a question and then you set out to answer this question by distributing surveys, what are the answers to the question and what recommendations are you going to make in your report? You're all going to write individual reports, but I want you to agree on the results, and I want you to agree on the recommendations recommendations. So you're going to use this meeting to talk about that. Now, that's just a general idea of what the meeting is, but your agenda will be more specific, your goals will be more specific, and your meeting minutes will go over what was decided, what recommendations you're going to make, and so on and so forth. So generally speaking, at the beginning of the project, you're going to turn in a group contract. At the end of the project, you're going to turn in a group member evaluation. And then twice during the project, once when you're writing the survey and once when you're analyzing what the survey means, you're going to turn in an agenda, proof of a meeting, and meeting minutes. So you're going to do all of that twice. You can meet between those things. You can talk between those things. I just need proof of the 2 meetings and the group contract at the beginning and the group of member evaluation at the end. And just to reiterate, I already said this, but you are going to... The due dates are flexible. So, for example, if I say an agenda is due, on Wednesday, but you have it done a couple of days earlier, you can turn it in. If I say you have to submit proof of a meeting on Wednesday, that doesn't mean you can meet on Wednesday and turn it in by midnight. But if you met on Monday, you can turn that in earlier. But what I want you to do is sort of pace somewhat close to that when the first meeting is due, that's when you're writing the survey. When the second meeting proof is due, that's when you're talking about the results of the survey, okay? So all of these things I will describe in more detail when you open it, where you're supposed to turn it in. But briefly, the agenda is a bulleted list of goals for the meeting. We're not leaving this meeting till we have answers to these questions in this order. And it should be fairly specific, because if you're just like, write the survey. Like, when are you done with writing the survey? Is that literally all you're going to do? Think about what you really want to accomplish and write it out in an agenda. And then meeting minutes, what were the decisions we made? And sometimes meeting minutes includes things that you talked about and rejected, so that you can remember later that you rejected those things. So it's not just decisions you made to say yes to. It could be decisions you made that you said no to. Okay? And I think that's about it. As far as recapping technology, the programs you can use for video chatting, the best ones I think are Google Hangouts and Skype, but there's other options. And the best options for the survey, I think, are FIU Qualtrics, Qualtrics, or Google Forms. So FIU, Qualtrics, Google Forms. So you can do either one of those and share the link. I think that's about it, but if you have any questions, let me know. But the key here right now is to set up your first meeting, which you do not have to have proof of. The first one I want proof of is really your second meeting. But your first meeting will be picking the topic, writing the group contract, and writing the agenda for the second meeting, which you will prove to me. Okay? Let me know if you have any questions. I hope that helped you to understand the general gist of what's due in the next few weeks. I'm here for you. Just send me an email if you have a question.